Hi, all. This is the beginning of the Mason and Dixon analysis. This episode is going to be a free one because all of the Chapter Zero posts, which are just the beginnings of new parts or the beginnings of new books, are also going to be free as a kind of taster for free subscribers, whereas all the other posts are going to be for paid subscribers only. If you like this, or if you like listening instead of reading the posts, or if you just want to support me, feel free to subscribe. I think there's a $5 a month subscription or a $50 a year subscription. Or if you really want to help me out, there's a bigger one. I don't even remember what it's called, but like a founders subscription or something along those lines. But anyway, we're going to be doing Mason and Dixon. Since I'm not really doing a red post for my announcement of Mason and Dixon, I'll kind of say a few things here. First of all, I'm going to be going through the rest of Thomas Pynchon's novels as the years go by. Obviously, I've just finished up Gravity's Rainbow after, what has it been? A year and 8 months or so. And so now, for the next probably year and a half, maybe less, maybe a little more, I will be doing Mason and Dixon. And from then on, I'll be going through the rest of his novels in chronological order from a historical perspective. So, not like publication chronology, but through the eras that Thomas Pynchon writes about. So, obviously, starting with this one, then going on to Against the Day, which is a late 19th and early 20th century novel, skipping Gravity's Rainbow since I've already done that for World War II, and then moving on to V, which takes place in the 1950s and technically partially in World War I, but hey, so does Gravity's Rainbow. After that, we'll be going through the Chronolot 49 for the 60s, Inherent Vice for the 70s, Vineland for the 80s, and finally Bleeding Edge for the 2000s and technically late 90s. A lot of the time throughout my Mason and Dixon analysis, I will be referring back to Gravity's Rainbow, not a whole ton, where it's going to make it impossible to understand my analysis or the book if you didn't read Gravity's Rainbow or didn't read my posts on Gravity's Rainbow, but I will reference it enough to where it could possibly be beneficial for you to go back and do that. I think obviously this book was written after Gravity's Rainbow, so Pynchon had a lot of those ideas in mind. And I also think all of his books connect together thematically and kind of show the trajectory of American history and how we were founded, how we were warped and controlled, and how we are now. So if you want to go back and read those, go right ahead. I'll be making the connections either way, but you'll be fine if you don't want to. Other than that, I think that's really all I have to say before starting this analysis. So, if you're already a paid subscriber, thank you. If you're not, don't worry about it unless you want to. Appreciate it either way. Mason and Dixon, Part 1, Chapter 0, Material and Spiritual Worlds. An analysis of Mason and Dixon on the title of the novel, the dedication, and on the title of Part 1, Latitudes and Departures. Starting with a long quote. Quote, "What's a colony without its dusky natives? Where's the fun if they're all gonna die off? Just a big chunk of desert, no more maids, no field hands, no laborers for the construction or the mining. Wait, wait a minute there. Yes, it's Karl Marx, that sly old racist, skipping away with his teeth together and his eyebrows up, trying to make believe it's nothing but cheap labor and overseas markets. Oh no, colonies are much, much more. Colonies are the outhouses of the European soul, where a fellow can let his pants down and relax, enjoy the smell of his own shit, where he can fall on his slender prey, roaring as loud as he feels like, and guzzle her blood with open joy. Eh? Where he can just swallow, and rut, and let himself go in a softness, a receptive darkness of limbs, of hair as woolly as the hair on his own forbidden genitals, where the poppy, and the cannabis and coca grow full and green, and not to the colors and style of death as do ergot and agaric, the blight and fungus native to Europe. Christian Europe was always death, Karl, death and repression. Out and down in the colonies, life can be indulged, life and sensuality in all its forms, with no harm done to the metropolis, nothing to soil those cathedrals, white marble statues, noble thoughts. No word ever gets back. The silences down here are vast enough to absorb all behavior, no matter how dirty, how animal it gets." End quote. From Gravity's Rainbow, Part 3, Chapter 3, page 317. The world and people evolved in regard to colonization, imperialism, monopolization, and empire within the last 180 years that spanned between the events of Mason and Dixon and Gravity's Rainbow. But the inherent purpose of colonies, if colonies could be said to have an inherent purpose, largely remained the same. They are, of course, used to extract resources, free or nearly free labor, acquire land, build upon that land, increase private property, and so forth. But an even more sinister purpose lies beneath the surface, for not everything can be derived through pure class analysis or pure desire for economic power and profit. There is the desire for power of another type, that to do as one will, to sexually and violently oppress, to get off on one's more horrific and sinful desires, to see blood and hear screams of terror, to know you have staked your claim on a land and on a life. This is where America began, on this very idea, this very want. The title: Mason and Dixon. Charles Mason was born in April of 1728 in Gloucestershire, England. Prior to the events of the novel, he attended a grammar school where he received heavy instruction in mathematics. Due to his domestic proximity to James Bradley, the third Astronomer Royal, and his success in mathematics, Mason was offered a position at the Royal Observatory. The Royal Observatory is where the scientists, specifically astronomers and the like, worked for the English royalty to gather whatever information they needed. He later married one Rebecca, maiden name unknown, who died at age 31 in 1759, leaving Mason and his family with two children, William and Dr. Isaac. This is where we find Mason, circa 1760, at the beginning of the novel. Jeremiah Dixon was born in July of 1733 in County Durham, England, around 5 years after Charles Mason. Prior to the events of the novel, he studied astronomy and mathematics at Barnard Castle, in the same region of his birthplace, and was eventually heavily taught by the mathematician William Emerson. Very little else is known about Jeremiah Dixon prior to his meeting with Charles Mason. In 1760, Mason and Dixon were chosen to conduct the observation of the transit of Venus, which would lead to the beginning of their long-time partnership and friendship. These are the initial major ideas we will be observing. First, the development of two individuals over the course of their life, becoming enamored with the sciences, their fascination with the intangible, the minutiae which makes up the world, and discovering what certain power structures will utilize this knowledge for. Secondly, the friendship between these two individuals, seeing how they will not only evolve in regard to love and brotherhood, but also how they will find solace in each other among the terrifying realms of the colonization and oppression that they unknowingly, at least at first, are helping enact. However, Mason and Dixon does not only refer to the pair, but to the line as well, charted between the years of 1763 and 1768. Years past the event of the transit of Venus, which encompasses the events of Part 1 of the novel, the two were also chosen to chart the boundary dispute between the newly colonized Pennsylvania and Maryland, which encompassed the events of Part 2. A couple major points, because there are a near infinite number of other points, stick out here. Firstly, the concept of borders as a whole. We will witness the abstract nature of what a border truly is, how one devises them through mystical and astral means, and through entirely theoretical, metaphysical, speculative, economic, and symbolic ideologies. However, if one moves back to the basics of what life is, we will realize that they, the borders, do not truly exist. Secondly, if we are forced to accept that this border does exist, we know it is the dividing line between the American North and the American South, the southern realm of slavery and the northern realm of, well, one could say freedom, but in reality, not too much is different up there. Yes, of course, true slavery in the South was far more horrifying and destructive to an entire people. So, this dividing line does, to some extent, show the division between true oppression and freedom. But given the North, and if we travel a few hundred years into the future, our entire nation did not really believe in the true freedom of an oppressed class and did not believe in anything related to those of power less than the elite, we can clearly see that this border being abstract is more than just the fact that it doesn't tangibly exist, but that which it represents does not even exist. Freedom versus oppression. The North simply wants you to believe that you could be free up here, and then would be wholly willing to oppress you once you arrived. Finally, it is about those who live or travel upon this line: the preterite, the elite, the flora and fauna, the spiritual and material, and all of those in between. Dedication for Melanie and for Jackson. Mason and Dixon is Thomas Pynchon's fifth novel, published in 1996 following Vineland, written in 1990. 1990 was when Pynchon married his editor, Melanie Jackson, and 1991 was when his son Jackson Pynchon was born. While Vineland was officially where Pynchon began developing far more hopeful and familial themes, Mason and Dixon is where they really shot off. His first three novels, V in 1963, The Crime of Lot 49 in 1965, and Gravity's Rainbow in 1973, despite all having some level of hope, were almost entirely used as exposés for the military industrial, hyper capitalist elite power structures built into America and the 20th century world as a whole. They had hope and beauty for sure, but hope and beauty did not come fully fledged into his work until Pynchon himself experienced true love and fatherhood. Because if love and fatherhood, or motherhood, or parenthood in general, could not bring hope to your mind, well, what could? It is from this point forward, or from Vineland, though to a slightly lesser degree, that we see Pynchon yearning for and believing in a better future. Part 1: Latitudes and Departures. The title of Part 1 embodies duality between the spiritual and material. We will begin with the latter, the material. And interjection, I do recommend looking up the image on my post online, on the actual text post, because it's a lot easier to visualize rather than me explaining what I'm about to explain, which includes some degrees and some sort of trigonometry and stuff like that. End interjection. So beginning with the material. Latitude represents the northerly or southerly position on Earth. It is importantly an objective fact. 30 degrees north is always 30 degrees north. Until the tectonic plates shift over an epochal period of time, it will always pass through the south of Cairo, Baja California, parts of Florida, and so on. Just as 60 degrees south will, within numerous lifetimes, possess the same lands, and something as specific as 43.4 degrees will do the same. Departure means the leaving of one's land or one's home, or purely definitionally from the Oxford English Dictionary, quote, the action of leaving, especially to start a journey, end quote. Again, it is a fact, leaving a place, one's family, one's home, to arrive at another. These latitudes and departures are referential to specific places or states of being on our Earth. However, if we move on to the intangible, or what we should call abstract, aspects of these words, things change. Latitudes and departures are terms used in the surveying of lands to form borders. If the distance between point A to point B were the hypotenuse, both moving in a positive direction, a latitude would represent the y-axis line's distance of the same triangle, where the departure would represent the x-axis line's distance. Or to put it in the sense of a border survey, if a team were to move a certain distance southwest from point C to point D, moving x distance, they could take that C to D as the hypotenuse of a triangle, calculate the north-south latitude as well as the opposite, and the east-west departure as the geometrical adjacent. And while these, like the more unchangeable aspects of the words latitude and departure, are quite literal, it is their usage that differentiates them from the former. They are used for purely abstract means, to map borders on continents and lands, dividing lines in which the laws, the populations, the leaders, the politics, the geographies, and so on could be drastically different simply because some entity said that those on one side of an invisible line were entirely separate from the other, for no reason but a person's desire or a randomly derived law. Thus, we have the natural state of Earth and its people being compared to the abstract mathematics of colonization and the borders thereof. Two major themes which will soon be introduced in this section. So, Part 1 will encompass the introduction to these ideas, but will also serve as the introduction to our characters, many other motifs and themes regarding colonization and imperialism. It will introduce us to the methods in which America and thus the capitalist Western world would begin, how business and trade would run our lives, and how oppression would serve both as a means of production and of perverse desire. That's the end of Part 1, Chapter 0. I'll see you next time for Part 1, Chapter 1, the first chapter of Mason and Dixon. So until then, Thank you.